This day is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Fiscally responsible, financial geniuses, monetary magicians. These are things people say about drivers who switch their car insurance to Progressive and save hundreds. Visit progressive.com to see if you could save. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and affiliates. Potential savings will vary. Not available in all states or situations.
Hello and welcome to This Day, a history podcast from Radiotopia. My name is Jody Avergan. This day, April 24th, 1778. We are in the third year of the Revolutionary War. Fighting is taking place across the colonies on land and at sea. The French are secretly helping the Americans. The British are starting to feel the pressure. And the Americans are lodging some pretty successful naval battles. Many of them, as you would imagine, take place off the American shore. But starting in 1777, some American captains are getting a little plucky. They have taken their ships closer to England, mounting attacks on trading vessels and others in the English Channel. And then on this day, in April of 1778, a captain by the name of John Paul Jones decides to up the ante. He's not just going to cruise around off the coast of England. He is going to attack the shore. And this, Jones's raid on the port of Whitehaven, is the only American attack on British soil during the American Revolution. And let's be honest, it was a little bit of a half-brained idea. It kind of half-failed. It kind of maybe mostly failed. But let's talk about John Paul Jones bringing the fight to the British here, as always, with their full brains, not half-brained. Nicole Hammer of Vanderbilt and Kelly Carter-Jackson of Wellesley. Hello there.
I am not promising you have my entire brain, but you've got a good 3/4 of it. Hello, Jody.
Hey there.
But you promised to never mount a bungled 2 a.m. raid on the port of Whitehaven.
I promise nothing.
No.
Okay. The spirit of John Paul Jones
Keeping
is
my
in
options open. We are in tumultuous times.
Fair enough. So, look, I mean, I love this story because if people do know John Paul Jones, it might be because he was the one who supposedly uttered that phrase, "I have only just begun to fight," which he said, I think, a couple years later during a battle. And I kind of placed him as a naval hero. And certainly that phrase, probably apocryphal, but that phrase sort of has that kind of like, oh, he's one of America's real heroes. But this is the kind of earlier part of his career, much rockier, full of many more bungles before he kind of gets his big moment and maybe stumbles into his big moment. Knowing that, what do we need to know about Jones, his personality? He's kind of unsavory character, I guess.
He's definitely a character. He would fit very well into a musical. And in fact, he's kind of like Alexander Hamilton in some ways. He was born in Scotland in 1747, and he is a working class guy. He starts as a sailor at the age of 13, so very, very young, and quickly works his way up. He's a captain in his own right by the time he's 21. He's a little guy. Short king. He's like 5'5", very wiry and slight, and has very strong facial features. So he's got like a big wedge of a nose and big high cheekbones and a strong chin. So you could just imagine like this guy's face coming at you, probably about waist level. And he also was a bit of a dandy. Like when he has access to resources, he gets himself some nice clothes. So he's somebody who, when he walks
short
into a
king
room,
behavior.
That's classic.
Stereotype.
I know.
Also, exactly what Hamilton did.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
He was also a bit of a fop. His other thing, in addition to his eye for the ladies, was he had a pretty bad temper, which I think probably works when you're on a sailing ship. Probably is inevitable if you're on a sailing ship from the age of 13. But yeah, that's our image of John Paul Jones.
I mean, there's reports that in these early years, he was in the slave trade, but then left that. Maybe he called it abominable. And then he kind of had some pirating years, maybe. I don't think there's actual proof that he was a pirate, but he was, he was cruising around and up to some sketchy behavior. And he definitely rode his crew hard, to put it mildly. I mean, I think there were reports that he killed a few mutinous crew members, I think by flogging them to death in some instances. But yeah. And somewhere in here, he changes his name from John Paul to John Paul Jones, which I just want to linger on. It's like, if you're going to change your name, What's the impetus there? It's like, how do I make this even more generic?
That's right. He's like,
JPJ.
Yeah,
one more generic
so.
name and I'll just fade from memory.
Yeah.
But it's interesting. So he does kind of like go off the grid for 5 years. Those could be his pirating years.
Yep.
Who knows? But when he comes back, he changes his name. All right.
That's true.
Yeah. I think he got up to some things while he was out there.
I kind of like a person with 3 names.
Yeah, no, I like a person with 3 names. I'm just like, put some flair on it. If you're going to choose, why choose another super generic name? But, he comes back. He does like bury his past, reinvent himself a little bit. And he kind of works his way into some pretty elite circles, huh?
Very elite. Yeah. He is hanging out with the people we think as classically part of the founding generation. He has this background as a sailor, and so he quickly joins up with the Continental Navy, which will later become the U.S. Navy. He sails to France. He meets John Adams. And this is where we get our other description of John Paul Jones from, is Adams meets him. And the way he describes him is so interesting. He calls him the most ambitious and intriguing officer in the American Navy. Eccentricities and irregularities are to be expected from him. They are all in his character. They are visible in his eyes, which he describes his eyes as having a kind of wildness and softness, which I thought was... You get the sense that he's a little unpredictable.
Yeah.
But that Adams is absolutely fascinated by him. And other revolutionary leaders were too. That's how he gets into these high places within the military. Richard Henry Lee, who's another higher up in the colonies, helps get him appointed to a higher position in the Navy, and that's what gets him into the high seas when it comes to the war.
I mean, he's a social climber. Like, I think he's an opportunist. He sees all of these movers and shakers, and he wants in. He also becomes friends with Benjamin Franklin as well. Like, he's making friends with all of the founding fathers. I think he knows where the seat of power is, and he wants to be in the room. Sorry, Aldous Hamilton.
Yeah.
Poor Jody over there has no idea what we're talking about.
He wants to be on the ship where it happens.
There we go.
Get it.
I know.
But also that wildness and that like glint in his eye. Like, I don't know if we can trust this guy. That serves as a benefit in some way. I mean, we're talking about obviously a band of revolutionaries. We're talking about a Navy that is like months old or years old at this point, is basically being propped up kind of on the fly. So it's not like there's systems in place or even standards for what we're looking for. And so someone who's like plucky and a climber and a little bit of a loose cannon, so to speak, fits right in this moment where the line between pirates and privateers and official Navy men is pretty blurry.
Radiotopia is proud to welcome a new show called Proxy, hosted by Yowei Shaw, a brilliant podcast host and reporter who you may know from NPR's Invisibilia. On her new show, Proxy, Yowei tackles your niche emotional conundrums, the kind where you are having trouble getting answers because no one in your life can relate, or maybe because the one person you wish you could talk to won't or can't. Look, we've all been there. We have felt alone with a problem. But what if you had your own personal investigative journalist scouring the world for the perfect stranger who gets it? This is such an exciting new show. Think of it as emotional investigative journalism. And it continues to mean that Radiotopia is the home for some of the most interesting and ambitious audio makers on the planet. Yowei definitely qualifies. So check it out, Proxy with Yowei Shaw. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. New cases every other Tuesday. This episode is brought to you by Quince. So let me tell you how I spent a recent Sunday morning. We have this big wall calendar in my house, the whole year at a glance. And a couple times a year, we take it off the wall and fill it out with our plans. This most recent time, it was all about spring and summer travel, laying out the windows where we are going to try and take some fun trips. And guess what we will need on those trips? Some great luggage. It is time to travel in style, folks, and this year I am treating myself to the luxury upgrades I deserve with Quince's high-quality travel essentials at fair prices. Quince has premium luggage options and stylish tote bags to carry it all. And while you're on your trip, you are of course going to want to look good. Quince has lightweight European linen styles from $30, washable silk tops, comfy lounge sets. I just picked up a couple great pairs of new sunglasses, one for the car, one for my suitcase. People used to travel in style, folks, and I am doing what I can to bring it back. And of course, all Quince items are priced 50 to 80% less than similar brands. So for your next trip, treat yourself. Go to quince.com/thisday for 365-day returns plus free shipping on your order. That's QUINCE.com/thisday to get free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/thisday. Happy travels.
Yeah, and you could imagine him in a even more hierarchical British society, not doing particularly well.
Totally.
But being in the colonies gives him new opportunities.
Yeah.
And maybe no surprise, I'm sure there's people out there who are big into the naval history of this all, but the structure and the actual boats of the U.S. Navy, such as it's being stood up, reflect that, right? They're more nimble. They're built for these kind of like quick raids. There's a little less regimented or sort of burdened by protocol, which I think starts to serve them well, especially as I mentioned, we get into 1777. You have some of these American captains who are just kind of freelancing a little bit, but some of them are saying, you know what, let's take some trips here. Let's go and sort of explore the British waters. And so throughout 1777, there's captains like Lambert Wicks and Gustavus Conyngham and William Day, and they're making raids into the British waters, and they're realizing that you can raid ships that are trading goods, but also transporting gold and silver, and then bring that back to the colonies. So they're kind of getting a little ambitious, and they're going out there. And that kind of spurs Jones to return to British waters, to his homeland, this time as an enemy. And he's got, I'd say, a mid-sized ship. He doesn't have a ton of people, but he probably has like 30, 40 people with him as he's patrolling these waters. It's a little unclear exactly why he goes over. Part of the thinking is that there had been a raid in the colonies that France was tied up in that had like not gone well for the Americans, and he was a little bit of a payback sort of mission here. But it doesn't seem like there were official orders or even an idea for what are we going to do when we take our ship over to British waters. And along the way, he kind of raids a couple ships, and I think he picks up some flax along the way, I read. He picks up other goods and so forth. But then he gets to April of 1778. On April 17th, he cooks up this idea to raid Whitehaven, which is actually the town where his maritime career had begun. So maybe there's a little bit of a personal element here as well. And he spends the day basically trying to convince his crew to do this raid, and they are not buying it. His top lieutenants are protesting. What the surgeon on board would later wrote in his diary, quote, "Nothing could be got by burning poor people's property." And I guess lucky for the people who were a little hesitant about what does this guy want us to do, the winds shifted and they force him to abandon this attempt. They have to move a little more towards Ireland, but then he's not done.
No.
He wants to come back for more.
No. He tries to make another attempt. And basically he says, this is what we're going to do. There are about 200 to 400 vessels in this harbor, and we are going in Whitehaven's harbor, and we're going to get to these ships and we're going to set them on fire. And he comes up with this scheme where, he doesn't have that much manpower himself. He takes about 30 men, he splits them up, puts them in two small boats, says, I'll go north, you go south, to try to, get around these boats. And when they get to these boats, it's crazy because they don't have anything to set the boats on fire. They run
the best laid plans.
They run out of fuel for their lanterns, and they're like, this is not a good idea. And it just starts to sort of fall apart. A lot of men get scared. They are like saying that they hear noises and they want to back out. Some of the men have...
This is all going down at like 3 a.m., right? 4
a.m. It's terrible. It's terrible because, some of the sailors, they go on land and they go get a drink. They stop at a bar.
That's
and
great.
It's like,
I love that
who
one.
does that? And then that tips off,
And what time do these bars open?
I know.
Right?
Do these bars close? That tips off the town and, lets the townspeople know, like, hey, I think there's a plot. I think there are people who are here to try to sabotage our ships. And so Jones has to basically sort of recalibrate and figure out another plan that's going to allow him to have some sort of success. Because right now, it's looking like a failure on all fronts. So one of the things that they do is that they get their boats together and they sail to the opposite side of this small bay called Kirkenbright Bay. And that is where...
Nicely done.
Oh, thank you.
Kirkenbright.
That is where the Earl of Selkirk lives. And they come up with this plot to kidnap the Earl of Selkirk as a way of, claiming some sort of victory. And when they get to his residence, well, he's not there. He's gone. And so
these guys have the worst plans. Let's set this on fire. We don't have any fuel. We're going to do it anyway. Let's kidnap the Earl. The Earl's not there. Let's take his dishes.
Yeah, that's what's
Let's take a drink along the way.
They're like, we're going to take his silver dishes and platters so he can know that we were there. And it's like... it's crazy. By the end of all of this failed sort of raid and kidnapping plot, Jones's people are threatening mutiny. Like, they're like, this guy is not our leader. He is not our guy. And maybe we need to overthrow him. Yeah. And it's pretty much disaster.
At this point in time, if you're Jones, you've got to be thinking, I'm going to have to come up with a plan, a good plan. A plan that's not stupid real quick, or I'm going to end up... I think his men at the time were planning to just leave him there, and he could swim home if he wanted to come back to the Americas.
Yeah. But then later that afternoon, they are putzing around, trying to figure out what's happening, trying to suppress the mutiny taking place on the ship, and they come across a ship called the Drake, which is part of the Royal Navy's fleet. It's a converted merchant ship, which is what most warships were at that time that were fighting in the Revolutionary War. And they take it on. And they're like, screw it. The state's going sideways anyway. Let's mix it up with the Drake. And lo and behold, the Ranger, which is John Paul Jones's ship, inflicts some serious damage. And it ends up, they kind of save the day. They rescue the day. And if you read the sort of history of the naval history of the Revolutionary War, like the defeat of the Drake is like a big, big moment and truly burnishes Jones's reputation. It is basically the first American naval success within Atlantic waters.
I mean, it's not, it's not a big fight. They surrendered in an hour. You know what I mean? This is not, I wouldn't necessarily call it huge in the way that we might think of it.
It makes a splash.
Yes, as the pieces of the boat are falling in the water. It's not a warship, though. I think that's the interesting thing, is that it's like this refurbished merchant ship, because all of like the good boats in the Navy are over in the Americas. And so, but even though it is not the British fleet's finest, this is an enormous sort of not even the strategic victory in a way for the colonists, because they've struck the British and they've defeated the British on the high waters when the British are supposed to have the world's best navy. And that, as a victory, is pretty important.
Yeah, I think the British learn, we've got some vulnerabilities that we can't necessarily protect all of our shipping or all of our coasts the way that we want to. And especially not against American raiders who are not necessarily following protocol. I mean, the British soldiers found this out on land as well. We talked about this in another episode, where that kind of guerrilla warfare style, where you're not regimented, where you're not sort of waiting on like specific orders, is what allows the Americans to just have more maneuverability. And the British, they do get overthrown by that time and time again.
I mean, the defeat of the Drake does have this kind of outsized impact in terms of sort of strategy, because I think it proved, oh gosh, we can have our trading lines can really be disrupted. But also, it's a press story. I mean, the press really likes John Paul Jones as a character. And so they write about this and they sort of overinflate it and they hype it up. It's a moment of panic for the British. And in fact, the kind of panic, the public panic over, oh my gosh, the Drake was defeated, that becomes satirized itself. I mean, it just becomes a real kind of media storm, and it not only, I think, shifts the sort of understanding of the naval relationship during the war, but also really burnishes Jones's reputation at the end of what was set to be a pretty boondoggle of a day. Can we stop and linger on that for, this is like, I think what they, sometimes you refer to a day like this as like, you're on one. I mean, like, he starts the day. There's like, this is one day. There's two bungled raids and then one, fall ass backwards into a defeat all by like 3 p.m. It's like pretty remarkable.
And he's like, I'll call that a good day.
And it's a career-making day. Yeah.
It's a good day.
Doesn't matter how you start, matters how you finish.
It's how you finish. Right. It's how you finish. Oh, man.
So we talk about how this burnishes his reputation. He goes on to be get international fame. A couple years later, we talk about how during a battle, he utters that famous phrase, "I've only just begun to fight." Part of the larger context here is, I think we hinted at this, but, I don't think the U.S. can afford, when this guy comes back and he's up to this sort of half-failed, half-successful expedition, they can't really afford to, excise him or just be like, no, sorry, you don't get another chance. He kind of has to stick around. And so, I don't know, is there a lesson there in terms of, his career that just, takes forever to get going, and then all of a sudden he has his moment?
Lots of second chances in the colonies, man. I mean, even just think of somebody like George Washington, who had a terrible bungle at the beginning of his military career where he led his men right into a massacre. But he was given a lot of second chances because they need soldiers.
Yeah. There's something to be said for being sort of the underdog in this war that makes heroes out of people that probably shouldn't be, that given any other circumstance, you might have someone who's much more qualified or much more prepared or much more skilled. But this is what they had. And and in some case, you could say, well, it was a success. So that's all that mattered, as long as they won, that's all that mattered.
Well, they were scrappy. And this is something we talked about when we talked about the Battle of Monotmy, that there was the sort of amateur nature and the smaller numbers meant they had to fight differently. And fighting differently was actually the best way for this small group of colonists to actually defeat the British, because they were used to fighting big wars against big powers. And now they were facing these new tactics that they weren't prepared for.
Yeah. And you have to capture the public imagination if you're a revolutionary force. And I think more than anything, Jones, who ends up becoming successful and one of the top naval officers and is sort of thought of as one of the founding fathers of the U.S. Navy. It wasn't so much strategic brilliance. It was a little bit of a flair and the willingness to embrace that and the willingness to be a public figure and to capture people's imagination. That is, I think, kind of the biggest thing he was known for. And that was both something that offered enthusiasm for the Americans and also attack the British psyche and attack the British confidence. And so I think that's one of the big lessons here and legacy here. And I think a lot of sort of naval commanders who kind of fall into that, it's their panache, as much as anything.
Yeah, Riz.
There it is.
I also think he's interesting because, a lot of the folks who fought in the Revolutionary War go on to become part of this governing generation. But he, at the end of the war, is kind of like, I don't have anyone left to fight.
Yeah.
So he joins the Imperial Russian Navy.
This is an incredible coda that I don't know. I want to know more about this. What is the Russian Navy up to in 1787? And there's Americans floating around. It's kind of remarkable.
Kind of amazing. Yeah, he rises to the rank of Rear Admiral and then gets into some trouble and gets forced out. And then he dies
at the age of 45. Not very old.
Honor 45. Yeah. I know. That's amazing. He is buried at the U.S. Naval Academy Chapel in Annapolis, Maryland. An honor guard stands at attention in his honor whenever the crypt is open to the public. So those of you in the Mid-Atlantic can go and visit and report to us on what you see about John Paul Jones there in Annapolis. But that brings to the end of the episode. I do want to thank listener Eric for suggesting that we get to this one. Keep your suggestions coming. Email us thisdaypod@gmail.com or fill out a form on our website, thisdaypod.com. But Nicole Hemmer, thanks to you as always.
Thank you, Jody.
And Kelly Carter-Jackson, thanks to you.
My pleasure.
Radiotopia.